Hey, it's Brock here from Rock Hill Farms, and I've run into the ultimate fear of every person who bales hay. I was in the middle of baling my first field, and we got a rain that I wasn't expecting. And it rained quite a bit. So in this video, we're going to talk about what to do about it now that it's happened. And I also want to get into the topic that's been coming up a lot in my videos about low quality hay and whether the stuff I'm baling is even worth baling. And we're not just going to talk in this video. I'm actually going to turn this hay and get it ready for baling. So first, let's look at my rain gauge here. We received ½ inch of rain yesterday, which is actually quite a bit. So let me tell you the timeline here. I cut this hay 3 or 4 days ago so that it would be ready for baling today or yesterday. And we had a clear forecast with no rain except for yesterday, which originally, whenever I was cutting, it said 18% chance, which is pretty low. I guess a 82% chance it doesn't rain, but you know how these things go. Well, yesterday in the morning it said 40% chance of rain. I was starting to get nervous, but I went ahead and I raked all this, and I made a video about raking it, and I got the baler set up, and I started recording a video baling, and I checked it and it said 89% chance of rain. And about 5 minutes later, it started raining pretty steady. And we got soaked with rain for the next 4 hours. Let me show you the hay field here. So this is the first field. It's the only one I raked. The chance of rain caused me to not rake fields ahead of baling them. So I raked one field, I was gonna bale one field. Then I would have come and raked field number 2. So this hay is not raked. There are a total of 5 fields that I'm baling out here. Now this one has been raked, which makes it more problematic. So let's go ahead and hit on the topic of trash hay. And the first thing is, I'm no expert in anything. This is only my first time actually baling my own hay. I have experience talking to other hay farmers. I know a lot of hay farmers. I've been asking them questions over the last 4 years. I've been on this property for 4 years, and each of those 4 years, I watched the neighbor bale this hay for me, and I watched what he did. I watched his process. I'd come out here and interrupt him and ask him questions, try to learn what I could. After they cut the first year, I was talking to other people who have their property hayed, and I said, from my understanding, there's work that needs to be done before we cut this hay again. We need to get a soil test and spread lime and fertilizers and all these different things. And I didn't know the details of it, but I had a general understanding that that needed to be done. So I approached the farmers who've been baling my hay and I said, hey, what do I need to do? Or are you guys going to fertilize this and put out the lime? And they said, we've got some fields that we do that on. That's a higher grade of what we call horse hay. But we call this, they had 2 terms and I'm forgetting one of them. They called it something else, and then they said, some people call this trash hay. And we just let whatever grows grow, and it's good enough. Our cows eat it, we sell it for a little bit less. But they said for their individual circumstances, it is not always cost justified to treat these fields with a lot of expensive things. And the time it takes, and that's everything that you do, you have to factor in your time being worth something, your fuel, your depreciation of your equipment, the need to own more equipment. All of these things cost money. And this farmer could be just wrong or have a different opinion than most people, but he felt like in his mind, it was perfectly fine to have some fields where it's a lower quality hay and the cows still eat it. Now, every year they take 2/3 of the hay and I get 1/3 of the hay. And every year I've sold my 1/3 of the hay. And, you know, last year I was getting $65 for a 6x6 round bale, which is going to vary based on where you live, but I think that's pretty normal around here. And I literally called up the people who bought my hay and said, was this any good? They said, yeah, there's no problems with your hay. It's not poor quality that needs to be sold for less. Now, If you're a hay farmer, you know way more about this than I do. You can educate me in the comments about what I'm getting wrong or what I don't know. I'm just telling you my personal experience. So as you watch me baling this, there's all kinds of different things out here. There is, wheatgrass, and there's fescue, and there's all kinds of different grass. And then there's all kinds of weeds mixed into it and all kinds of things that don't look desirable. And the decision I've made now that I'm baling my own hay is that I am going to go through the steps to make this a higher quality hay. And one of the reasons is taking the other farmers' answer for what's worth it and what isn't good enough for me. I have a desire to learn and understand the process. I want to know what it cost me to fertilize the field. I want to see the difference it makes in the hay and the yield. So I've talked to the local co-op. The guy who runs the co-op lives 2 houses down, and he watches my videos. We've been talking about how to deal with this hay field, and he's going to bring me a soil probe. We're going to test the soil. We're going to treat it in the fall. We're going to treat it in the spring, and we're going to see if we can get a better yield. But to the people who've been saying, you're wasting your time baling that, the local guys here in Kansas don't really believe that to be true. Now, let's talk about wet hay before we start turning it. Everyone's concern is raining on the hay, and the biggest problem is when it rains consecutive days or over and over on it, or really heavy rain where the hay is sitting in water. But I got my baling equipment from Phil at Small Farm Innovations, and Phil knows his stuff. He's been doing this himself for a lot of years, and he services equipment and he advises his customers. And I called him and I said, here's what happened. Here's how long my hay had been cut. I raked it and I was starting to bale, and I've got a couple good bales down there, and then it started raining. And let me tell you what he told me to do with the hay. He said there's 2 possible outcomes. If it rained, the top of your hay will be wet. The question that determines what you do is the bottom of the hay wet? He said, flip one of your raked piles over and feel it. If it looks or feels wet underneath, then you can't bale that. Essentially, he said, if the top is wet, the top will dry. If the bottom is wet, it's going to hold on to that moisture longer. That's where it's going to break down and can potentially rot or get moldy before you have a chance to do anything with it. And you can't roll it into hay while it's wet. So he said, if the bottom of the hay is wet, then you need to flip it and let it sit for another day or 2, depending on, how long you've got before it rains again. But the bottom of my hay is wet. So the best solution when your hay's wet is to run a tedder over it. Now, a lot of people don't have a tedder. The guys who do my hay, they have a tedder, but they said they never ted hay. They used to, then they decided it just wasn't worth the extra time that you put in. In practical terms, these are busy guys. They're haying a lot of acreage, but they also have regular jobs to support themselves too. They said for them, it just wasn't worth it to run a tedder all the time unless there's a specific reason, like perhaps your hay got rained on. So if you don't have a tedder, you can run the rake again. But I actually have a hay rake that easily converts into a tedder. There's a little lever I pull and move it over, and it switches it from a tedder. And it does that because as you rake, the rakes lift when they get over to the side, and that makes your windrow. If you switch it to tedder, it just rotates a cam, and now the rake stays down as it comes over to the side and lifts up when it's directly behind the machine. And what that does is spread the hay out. So I've got 30 acres to ted and spread and get it to dry. And it's going to be hot and dry the rest of the week, and we should be able to get all this dried out. we're gonna do a little trial and error because it's throwing a lot of this behind and loosening it up like we want, but some of it is still throwing off to the side, and I'm wondering if we leave the curtain down. If I leave the curtain down, if it'll go ahead and pull that to the back and then scatter it better. Let's find out. Well, I guess there's one way to find out. So you look down here, we've spread it out more than we have here. We're still making a windrow, which is not what we want. All right, so we've got all the hay tedded and it's ready to rake tomorrow. This has been a lot more time consuming than I realized, but it's also been really rewarding. So I appreciate you taking time to watch the video. I'll put links on the screen to a couple more of our videos, and I'll see you next time.